Looks weird when you sit there like this, covering your beard, and then it looks like a woman wearing a kippah.
It looks like
Yeah, like an Arab. All right, good Shabbos. All right, so this week's parasha is Parashat Mishpatim. Last week we were introduced to the almighty 10 commandments. This week in Parashat Mishpatim, we've got more than 30 different commandments in this week's parashas. It's almost like when you're reading something and you have to click read more at the bottom, the little blue line. That's what happened with this week's parasha. Moses decided to click read more on the 2 tablets. And we've got 30 plus commandments in this week's parasha. All of them derived from the 10 commandments themselves. You can actually take this week's parasha and put it into like a subcategory of each one of those 10 commandments. And there's laws about slavery, there's laws about damages, there's civil laws, there's religious duties, etc., etc. It covers a whole range of things. But today I want to look at one of the laws that we find in this week's parasha that is very relevant to us today. Because today is a special Sabbath. It is called Shabbat Mevarchim because we are about to welcome in the new month of Adar, which is occurring this week. A leap month, by the way. We've got 2 of them this year because we're in a leap year. And we're about to welcome in the new month. So today, I want to talk about the mitzvah of time and our calendar in particular. Because this week's parasha tells us that we are to begin our calendar with Pesach in the month of Aviv. So I want to talk a little bit about the calendar and how we see time. How do we experience time? What defines the concept of time to you? How do you define your time? How do you structure around your time? What is the focal point of your time in your life? Is your time structured around how many days of the week you have to work? Is your day's time structured around what time you have to chila at the end of the day? How do you structure time? How do you view time? Is your whole life circle around your deadlines that you have to meet for whatever project you're busy with? For those of you at school or college, is your time set around your timetables from when you have your classes? Where does your time find its purpose from? Because then we end up, in this life, let's say, God willing, 120 years. And before you know it, time is up. And your time, have you made the best use of it, is a question we all have to end up asking ourselves. So I heard a story this week of an atheist who wanted to come and debate a rabbi about his belief in God. So he came to the rabbi and said, Rabbi, we're going to set up a meeting with you, and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this idea of God. The rabbi says, well, I don't have any time to have this big discussion right now. Look at your calendar and tell me when we can meet together. So the atheist opens up his calendar on his phone and he says, next week I'm available anytime next week. How about you, Rabbi? And the rabbi says to him, wait a minute, you just disproved your own theory. You call yourself an atheist, but you believe in weeks. Weeks is a biblical concept. There's nothing in nature that points to a concept of weeks. The day, surely, the sun rises and the sun goes down. But a week, it's a biblical concept. You've already disproved your own idea of how you evaluate time. You've done a mitzvah, because the mitzvah in the Torah tells us 7 days are in the week. 6 days you should work, and the 7th day you shall rest. It is inculcated into your soul already that there is such a thing as God's time. And for us, when we read the Torah portions, and there's ones we've been coming through recently, we just came out of Egypt. And when we were in Egypt, our time was dictated by Pharaoh. He would tell us how long a day was. He would tell us how long a week was, how long a month was, how long we got off, etc., etc. He was the one that was in control of setting our time. But as we came out of Egypt in these last 3 parashas, with the Exodus, with the redemption, something changed drastically. Because God said to us, here is my commandments. And the very first commandment he gives to Israel as a nation, according to Rashi at least, is set a calendar. You shall begin your months with this month, the month of Aviv, the month of Nisan. That's the very first commandment that God gives to the nation of Israel, is to set your own time. It was a new beginning for us as a nation, literally, because when is the natural new year? When was the world created? On Rosh Hashanah, right? There's a 7-month difference between Rosh Hashanah and Nisan and Pesach. So we literally had to have a new beginning of the year. Hashem said to us, this is your new year. You shall begin your calendar with this month, the month of Nisan. Why? Because our focus for where we define our time now comes from God's plan for our lives, the redemption from Egypt. That is now the new focal point from where we actually judge how time works. And the new time that we had was reflected through our new status, because we were a redeemed people, and now our life and how we spend our time was meant to be lived as redeemed people. We were no longer bound by the rules and laws of nature, saying that your time is dictated by Rosh Hashanah when the world was created. Hashem said to us, now that you're a redeemed people, your time is dictated by this miracle that I performed for you. And if you look at the Jewish calendar, it's a very complicated thing, right? They say that we are a lunar people, which doesn't explain why many of us are lunatics. But our calendar, the Jewish calendar, majority of the time is based upon the lunar calendar, right? Every month we have to look at the new moon, and we say the blessing for the new moon, and we go in our toes like this, and we do that blessing at night. So we follow the lunar calendar, and the lunar calendar, of course, has 12 months. How many days are there in a lunar year? It's a bit short, right? There are 354 days in a lunar year. So we fall a bit short. For example, the Muslims, they follow a lunar calendar completely, and so we. So what happens with them is that every year they're about 11 days short. So you'll notice with the Muslim festivals, like Ramadan and all these other festivals, they move every year earlier and earlier by 11 days. So throughout your lifetime, you can have these festivals in every season that there is throughout the year, because they're only following a lunar calendar, which makes them lose out on the festival, on the what can I put it, the seasons of the year as well. Judaism, we do follow the lunar calendar, but not only that. Because in this week's parasha, we get a commandment when it tells us about the three festivals, the Shalosh Regalim. It says, you shall celebrate the festival of Matzot in the month of Aviv, which is an explanation. It's not the name of the month. The month of Aviv means the month of ripening. So we always have to have Pesach in springtime. So we have a problem then. If we follow a solely lunar calendar, we're going to have a problem. We're going to end up celebrating Pesach in the middle of winter. Or one day we're going to have Sukkot in the middle of winter. Can you imagine that? In Israel. Makes no sense. You see all the snow there in Israel this last week. Imagine if they were doing Sukkot and sleeping outside during that. It would make no sense. So therefore, the Torah actually tells us that we need to also follow the solar calendar, not just the lunar calendar. And the solar calendar, of course, has 365 and a quarter days in a year, which is why we have a leap year every fourth year. So that leaves us with this 11-day gap between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar that we have to fix. And how do we fix this? The Torah dictates for us that we have to institute a leap year, right? And we are currently in a leap year right now, and we are about to welcome not just a leap day, we're about to welcome a leap month, the extra month of Adar into our calendar. It works out that 7 out of every 19 years, we need a leap month. And that's how we always stay on track to make sure that Pesach is always in the springtime in Israel. So we add this extra month of Adar that's about to come in a few days from now. Now, in Hebrew, we refer to a month like this as a pregnant year, because we have an extra month, which is kind of like prophetic for the people. So God willing, all of you ladies sitting here, a month from now, miraculous pregnancies. It's the double month, Portia. It's the month of Adar. It's 2 of them. Maybe you can even have twins. Double blessing, or double trouble. So the month of Adar, what is that famous saying about the month of Adar? When Adar enters, our joy increases. This year we have the special occasion where we have the double, we have the leap year, and we have 60 days, 2 months full of celebrating ahead of us, starting this week. We have to be joyous, and we have to celebrate, and we have to have joy upon joy, double portion of joy. What's that saying in Philippians? Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. That's what these 2 months ahead of us are about. We are supposed to be joyful beyond understanding in these 2 months. Now, we learn a lesson from this law that we have about adding a leap month into our calendar. We learn that God needs us, wants us to be partners with him in his creation. The world doesn't run on autopilot. We actually, as his people, God commands us that we also have to take control of time in this world. And how do we do that? How do we control our time in this world? Well, go back to the beginning. Why did God create the sun and the moon in the first place? What does it tell us on the very first page of the Bible? Genesis chapter 1. He created the sun and the moon and the great luminaries and all the stars for the signs and seasons, for days and for years. It's not only so that we could see each other in the dark. It's also for reasons. Of course, we have days and we have years, but there's signs and there's seasons. The Hebrew word used there, of course, is Moadim. Moadim means the appointments that we have with Hashem. And this is telling us something extremely, extremely important. That the Moadim, the festivals that we read about in this week's parasha, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, the reason why the sun and the moon were created was so that we could have these festivals one day. That is the purpose of the sun and moon. We think of it the wrong way around. We think the purpose of the sun and moon is so that we can have life here, and we can breathe, and we can do some photosynthesis. No. The reason why God created them was in order for us to celebrate these festivals. Because what is the message of all three of these festivals? It's redemption. Pesach, we were redeemed from Egypt. Shavuot, God came down from his heavenly abode and gave us the Torah and redeemed us as a people and our souls. And Sukkot is the future final great redemption where the whole world will be redeemed and taken into a time beyond this time, the Messianic era and the world to come. The purpose of creation is to share with us the message of redemption. Now, unfortunately, we as human beings living down here on earth, we look at time as a linear thing because we know there was a start to our time and there will be an end to our time. But God is not like us, mere human. God exists outside of the realm of time. He created time itself. So that is why when it comes to God, the Talmud can make statements that make no sense to us, but make sense to Hashem. For example, the Talmud says, when God decided to create the world, where did he look to get the blueprints and pass the architecture papers? He looked in the Torah to create this universe. Does that make sense to us? No, the Torah came later, right? 3,000 years ago, the Torah came. How did he look there and then the blueprint? Makes no sense, right? But to Hashem, who lives outside of the realm of time, it makes perfect sense. Because the purpose of this creation was so that he could redeem us and make our souls even more pure. And therefore, he commands us in this week's parasha and a few parashas back when we had parashat Bo, when we came out of Egypt, the very first commandment, he tells us that we must start our calendar with the month of Nisan. Why? Because it is the time of our redemption, and redemption was the purpose of this creation. There's a famous old teaching that talks about the 10 commandments and compares this, the very first commandment here. Hashem says, Anochi, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Is this the way to introduce yourself? Shouldn't that have been at the beginning of the Torah? Rashi actually has this debate, I think, with the Rambam. Where is the actual beginning of the Torah? One says, no, it's in Bereshit. Bereshit bara, in the beginning, God created the universe. Why then, in the most important part of the Bible, the revelation of God, does he start off by not saying, I am the Lord your God who created the universe, but he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt? Because that was the purpose of creation. That's more important than the literal physical creation itself. And our sages tell us the reason that we can see that is because 10 commandments begin with the letter Aleph, whereas the Torah, where it starts off with the story of creation, begins with a Bet, which is the second letter in the Hebrew alphabet, showing us that there was something before, a purpose before we actually had this physical creation. Teaching us that the literal creation, the physical creation, is almost like smaller than the redemption. The redemption is the big idea that's going on here. But not only the redemption from Egypt for the nation of Israel, pointing towards Sukkot, the great and final redemption of all mankind. Every living soul will bow their knee and every tongue will confess. That is the great redemption that we are looking forward towards. So this idea of seeing God as outside of the realm of time and understanding that the purpose of creation was for the redemption helps us understand a very famous verse in the book of Revelations, where it tells us something that happened on Pesach. The Lamb was slain since the foundation of the earth, just even before the foundation of the earth. Because Nisan and Pesach time, when we're supposed to begin our calendar according to God, is a time for our great spiritual redemption. And 2,000 years ago plus, that came to fruition when Yeshua died and was resurrected and cleansed all our souls. There was a massive redemption that took place at that very time of year. That is when we're supposed to define our time from. So we're about to enter a lovely 3-month period of redemption. Adar 1, Adar 2, and Nisan. Adar, we were redeemed from Amalek, and Haman. We've got 2 months to celebrate that redemption. And then comes Nisan, where we celebrate the redemption from Egypt and the redemption that we gained through the sacrifice of our Master Yeshua. It's 3 months of redemption laying ahead of us. These 3 months ahead of us are the pinnacle of why we have time in the first place. So let's make sure as we enter this new month, we're about to announce the new month, that we readjust our internal clocks, not just regular clocks, our internal calendars to understand how we define time, what is the source and the reason for our time. That we are not controlled by nature when it comes to time, or stars in the sky, or horoscope, or these things. We're not controlled by any type of pharaoh you have in your life, whether it be your boss, your deadlines, or whatever it is. These things don't define how you see time. But through discipleship to Yeshua, what we do is we cross the space-time continuum. But we cross the space-time continuum because when we become disciples of Yeshua, we already partake of a time beyond this time. We already find ourselves as partakers of the Messianic era now already, before it even comes around. We have control over time, as if some of the greatest physicists can't even understand what that means. It's an amazing thing. And we do this by placing God's redemption of our lives and of our souls at the center of our universe. Let's make every second count. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I am out of time.
Go back to the